You want to fight? Or you want to win?
So right out of the gate, I want to talk about, you've created 700 incredible costumes, and over that, in fact, and I know that for every costumer, it is really hard to just isolate specifically one costume that was your favorite. So I'm going to kind of flip that a little bit and say, what was the most complex costume to make that ended up becoming one of your favorites?
Good question. I would say I'm probably going to go straight to the wedding dress from episode 3, because, the brief for that from Tony Gilroy, our showrunner, was like, we want something kind of that will appeal to people. It'll feel, relatable, approachable. It's timeless, it's classic, but it has to be, of course, of the Star Wars world and otherworldly. So it was quite a complex brief to me. But I think the idea of simplicity was really strong to me. So the silhouette of this dress is actually really simple. But of course, the detailings were incredibly complicated. It was a dress, I think it took a team of 3 people about 3 months to create the whole dress together. There's a very elaborate understructure. There's 34 panels of fabric, cut on the bias and all sewn together by hand with hand beading and then embellishment on top of that. So that was a very complicated build, but hopefully the finished product was just kind of simple, effortless, and the right kind of vibe for our Chandrilla wedding.
It was a very timeless look. And I love everything with Chandrilla. And I have to really say, you were bold for going for that many pleats, because I know pleating fabric takes a lot of time, especially some of the fabrics and the textures you were working with. Do you have a rough estimate of how many pleats your team worked on with this season?
We made the film in London in a studio called Pinewood, and there's a local pleating company called Cement Pleating that they powered through pleating for us for weeks on end to provide us with all of the pleating. I think there was over 700 pieces just of pleating that they wanted to create. I think there were about 200 extras at the wedding we had, plus all of our principals, of course. And we just used every single pleat known to man. The sunray pleat, the knife pleat, the box pleat in all different sizes. And so that was really important to us. And it was important because I knew the whole Chandrilla wedding finished with a big dance sequence. And I was thinking, well, what's going to move well? What's going to create great images for our camera? What will really tell the story of Mon Mothma being lost in this euphoric moment of swirling fabrics where she just wants to forget all of her troubles? So pleating seemed like a really good solution to that, because pleats move so beautifully. We pleated in silks and sheers and things like that. So you had this fantastic moment at the end of episode 3, which is just a swirl of pleated fabrics and something for Mon Mothma to lose herself in.
Absolutely. And I have to say, I love the texture of Andor. I love when shows dedicate themselves to making sure their costumes feel tactile. Like watching a scene, you can imagine exactly how it must feel on the skin or how it would feel to touch. Walk me through the process of sourcing some of these fabrics that go into the series.
I'm really glad you noticed the textures, because that's a really huge thing for me. In season 2, we had 9 different planets that we went to, and we really wanted to define each of those planets and make them separate from each other. And so how we do that is through a color palette, through textures, through silhouettes. So textures incredibly important. And also, the camera sees everything up close, and we wanted to create textures that, were both relatable, like understandable by the audience, but also maybe some things that they've never seen before, and posed questions for them. What was really important for me was setting up a costume department with a really strong textile team that were able to take fabrics that we found and then manipulate them, dye them, apply finishes to them, process them in ways that would result in these really unusual fabrics that would help tell the stories of all these different cultures. So it was an amazing textile team combined with an incredible team of people that were sourcing fabrics from all over the world, from Europe, from Japan, from America, of course, from England, where we were, and just putting things together in really unusual combinations. So I think that was really important to me to create something very compelling and interesting for the viewers.
Did you come across any surprising sources for some of the fabrics? I always remember, I think it was Game of Thrones that they ended up finding some fabric at like IKEA or something like that. Every time I go to I think about that and I'm like touching the rugs and the fabrics and thinking the way that, you kind of get creative sometimes when you're like, I want this specific look, but maybe this exact fabric is out of stock everywhere that I need it from.
Yeah, there were a couple of instances of that. I think we took, I was after this very subtle pleated fabric for one of the principals of Chandrila, and we couldn't quite get the texture that I wanted. But we found this really inexpensive fabric, and we washed it, and then it sort of what started out as a completely flat fabric because of the way it was woven. When you washed it, it created this incredibly unusual organic sort of ripple through the fabric. So that was a wonderful surprise. Another interesting sourcing story is that we in episodes 1, 2, and 3, there's a sequence where we have 12 members of a sort of early Rebel Alliance group on a planet. It actually ends up being Yavin that Cassian crashes his ship onto. So you have these very 12 characters that are all very unusual and dysfunctional. They're all bickering with each other. And we had to create a very individual looks for all of those characters. And we needed 3 of each of them because we were shooting it in the rain over 2 weeks. We found this incredible source of sort of ex-Army, Navy uniform apparel, sort of tarpaulins and tents and amazing sort of strange, flight suits and things from all different countries that had sort of landed in this amazing supplier in the south of England. So our team drove out there and they opened the door and it was literally mountains of clothes that were just like piled on top of each other. So it was exciting, but completely overwhelming. So it was like this amazing sort of treasure hunt to find 3 exactly the same multiples of things and unusual shapes and detailings that we could create these characters out of. So that was a wonderful creative experience.
I love adaptive reuse of weird military surplus. I've worked with some military surplus and costuming before, and it's so much fun because they have so many unique details to it that just add to the layers of things. I love that you brought up the color palettes in some of the scenes because I feel like a lot of regular audience members don't necessarily like recognize that color plays such an important role in the visual component of building these scenes. And I think Andor has done really well with kind of guiding the audience through the emotions of characters with the color palettes of not just the costumes, but also the sets. So I'm curious with the costumes, obviously, in particular, were there specific scenes that kind of took a little bit of extra time in figuring out exactly what color palettes you wanted the characters in as they were reflecting their emotional states? Because there's a lot of emotions running through season 2.
There certainly are. The writing is very dense. The characters are very complicated. There's a lot of emotions. You're absolutely right. So I think essential to this idea of world building and establishing palettes for different planets is the idea of working with a production designer and really kind of working out what each of these cultures stand for. What are we saying from them in our entire story? And how is that different from another planet? So Luke Hull, the production designer, and I sit down. We talk about what the planet represents, and then we talk about, we go right down to basics. We were like, well, what materials are available to these cultures to build their buildings, to make their clothing? Where do they come from? Is it very high tech? Is it very rustic? What are these people's beliefs and cultures? How do they feel about each other? How do they want to portray themselves to other people? What climate do they live in? So all of these things affect textures, colors, materials. Coming back to colors, though. So once we sort of have a color palette for each planet, we then sort of put that into test and we create mood boards of references and fabrics and set dressing items and illustrations of costumes and sets that it all comes together. The 2 of the interesting ones for me color-wise were the 2 brand new planets that we were going to, Chandrila and Ghorman. Chandrila, we sort of hit upon this interesting color palette of like beautiful neutral tones, lots of sort of very soft neutral tones with accents of metallics, all range of metallics, gold, silvers, bronze, rose golds, coppers. So that's felt really right for the sort of sophisticated elegance of Chandrila. So what were we going to do for Ghorman? So Ghorman for us represents all the best things about humanity. There's solidarity there. There's a great work ethic. They all support each other. They are proud of their culture and they wanted to withstand this incredible pressures from the Empire who are trying to crush them and silence them. So I thought a lot about, World War II and, Paris and Milan and places like that where there was an old world European elegance in the color palette and something that was worth saving. It wasn't flashy like Chandrila or Coruscant. It was sort of this sort of more restrained color palettes, lots of navy, again, neutral tones, quite a lot of warm colors to sort of accentuate the humanity of these people. So yeah, a lot of thought went into the color palette too of the planet Ghorman.
I love the costumes in Ghorman. I got to talk to Kyle earlier on in the season about his character's kind of evolution, and would love to hear your take on getting to play with Cyril in Ghorman and getting to kind of see that evolution in his own style from where he is in season 1, both when he's in the military and then when he's working, within the ISB. But his character changes so much once he's introduced to that something that's worth fighting for on Ghorman.
Absolutely. It's such a strong story to be told because it really represents someone coming in touch with a culture that is expressive. It's very human. It's like it enjoys culture and ideas, and it's very opposite to where Cyril comes from. So when we first see him in season 2, he's like a imperial bureaucrat. It's a very corporate look that he goes. It's extremely fastidious, extremely minimal, and like no human details whatsoever. But when he comes in contact with this amazing Ghorman culture, they have beautiful fabrics, they enjoy textures and colors and combining their looks together in a really expressive way. He gets influenced by all of that. And we like to think that he maybe had a tailor make a beautiful coat for him out of Ghorman silks spun by the spiders. And he, he wears a beret and he buys a velvet muffler and wears that. And you sort of see this evolution of him expressing himself and playing with clothing to be an expressive possibility. So I think that's really strong because he becomes more Ghorman, and then it makes the tragedy even stronger when the Empire comes in and crushes and silences the Ghor. He is kind of a victim. He feels like he's working for the Empire, but in fact they don't care about him at all, and they end up completely crushing him. So I think the clothes hopefully help tell that story a little bit.
They do. And I love Ghorman because we get this introduction to the spiders, like you mentioned, and the fact that their tactile or their textile that they're exporting is from the spider's silk. Were there conversations about what that Twillery, what that product would look like, what the spiders are producing that you were involved with in coming up with those fabric textures on Ghorman?
Yeah, absolutely. As usual, there was lots of crossover with the art department. Rebecca Alloway, who is the main set dresser, had lots of conversations with me about what is Ghorman twill and what does that look like. And together we came up with some great fabrics that are in the showroom with the scene where Cassian's alias, the fashion designer, goes and he's looking for swatches for his new collection. That's his front. In fact, as we know, he's actually sort of working with the local rebels to help them with their own missions. But yeah, we love the idea of this fashion designer, Cassian, that we've never seen before. It's the absolute opposite to this sort of scruffy, layered, worn-out hero that we've seen him before. This Varian Sky, his fashion designer alias, it was extremely fastidious. He's in these very dramatic colors, very dark, sort of purple, a very crisp white shirt, lots of handmade accessories and things, these great sort of eyewear that we designed for him. So I think that you can really imagine that a designer coming in and looking at all these great fabrics and that alias being very comprehensive and that people wouldn't suspect that in fact he's someone working for the Rebel Alliance.
Yes, I love that you brought up Varian Sky because I was going to ask you, was that like the first time you were getting to create a character that was not so dissimilar from what you do in the real world? And is that how you address yourself if you were in Star Wars?
Interesting questions. I mean, of course, it was fun thinking about, what does a fashion designer look like in the Star Wars universe? And, I'm a costume designer, so that is slightly different from a fashion designer. I do characters rather than produce collections of clothing. But I thought, well, what is the most iconic fashion designer, or, when people think fashion designer, I think they think of someone like Karl Lagerfeld, who has this very dramatic way of presenting himself to the world. It's very self-aware, everything's considered and curated and just perfect. So I kind of went in that direction for Varian Sky, but added, of course, our own Star Wars twists, the beautiful capes and the sort of softly tailored elements that he wears together. That was our take on what a fashion designer might look like in Star Wars.
I'm so glad that I picked up on that because I first thought Karl Lagerfelder, and so I'm glad that I was not wrong to guess that. I have so many more questions about like the little details and things. I know Star Wars has very specific rules for how clothing fastens within the galaxy far, far away. So for you, like, what was the challenge of perhaps helping you to look outside of the box and working with some of the ways that we know things fasten, no zippers, specific kinds of, I think, no buttons, very different from how our clothes look day to day.
I was trying not to think about it as rules because I feel like we didn't want to add restrictions or limits to our aesthetics. And I have to say, Kathleen Kennedy at Lucasfilm was so encouraging of us to think outside the box and, not be tied down by the Star Wars canon, but to show us something surprising and fresh and modern. So I really felt very liberated by that. I did, however, of course, do my research and try to absorb 50 years of Star Wars image making, films, animations, graphic novels, all of the way that these characters have been represented. So I thought it was important to know the rules before we thought about trying to break them. George Lucas always used to say there needs to be something from our own earthly world of references in the costumes and the sets of Star Wars so that our audience can actually relate to these characters. They're not like way off, wild characters that are completely stylized. How is that costume even made? It's more like referring to cultures, whether it's Tibetan culture or African culture or Middle Eastern culture, World War II. Like there's always something in the costumes that triggers a emotional response, a historical response in the audience so that they can say, oh, okay, I feel like I know what this character's background is or what it's trying to say or what this character stands for. So I was very aware of trying to do that with my costumes. So it was a balance of trying to do interesting costume construction that really pushed the boat out and tried new things, but always bringing it back to the fact that we didn't want to distract with the costumes. They just had to feel real, authentic, and believable and help our audience connect to the story.
And we definitely do in watching it and connecting with it. I have another very small costume detail question. I want to know about the shoes because I know that cobblers are kind of a dying breed right now. And I want to know about the sourcing for the shoes. Did you have an in-house cobbler among your team that was helping with those? Is it adapting things that are on the market now? I'm so curious. I love looking at footwear.
Yeah, footwear is one of those things that I'm obsessed with because, I think it's because in a fitting, actors always say to me, if the footwear is right, that is over half the battle. If I feel okay walking through a space in my shoes, and I can relate to that. We've all had to wear uncomfortable shoes or shoes that just don't feel right and you feel awkward. So shoes are very important. I think for the most part, because making shoes is such an elaborate art and extremely specific, I tried to use the world's most interesting existing shoes that were sourced from all over the planet, came into our workroom as raw materials, and then we adapted and made them right for our story and our characters. So we didn't have an in-house shoemaker, but we certainly sent lots of shoes out to be resoled, to add details to the uppers. So long as the fit and the comfort was right and the actors felt grounded, we could then add embellishment. And I thought that was more important than the extremely complicated, long-term process of creating a shoe for someone. You can take, 5 goes until you get it right. We just didn't have that time, those resources. So by using existing shoes and making them right for our characters, we felt that was a better direction to take.
Especially when you end up needing duplicates. It's very hard. It's a hard process, but that's exciting to hear that.
There were exceptions, of course, because for things like imperial boots that tuck into the jodhpurs, they had to all be exactly the same. They don't exist in the world. And so we had them all made from scratch and a couple of variations in different heights to go with our different imperial uniforms. So we definitely had made things from scratch, but there were more basic, iconic shoes rather than anything too complicated.
I feel like we've talked a lot about the humanoid character costumes, but I'm curious, the background, there are a lot of different aliens in the background performers in those scenes. What was it like getting to play with some of those costumes and going a little bit more extravagant? I feel like background costumes don't get as much attention as the main cast, and I would love to hear some of the ones that were maybe the most fun to work on.
Working with the creatures was such a joy. I can't tell you. We would walk into the costume workshop and it was just like, this place is amazing. They have so many talented people making all of these very complicated creatures. And, for costumers, it was so much fun. There were characters that were 8 feet tall. There were characters that were 3 feet tall. There were characters that were wide, skinny, all sorts of shapes and sizes that had body padding and extensions and masks and breathing apparatuses that they had to hide inside the costume. So we had a whole workroom just devoted to costuming the creatures. And they were a very patient, group of people. As you can imagine, many fittings needed for these very bespoke, one-of-a-kind costumes. Often usually a creature would come back with about 4 or 5 different roles within the 8 hours of storytelling of Andor season 2. So they had to have different costumes for different scenes that they were in. So we had a wonderful team of costumers that were really thinking outside the box of creating these very unusual silhouettes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael. This was fantastic. Keep posting your incredible behind the scenes photos on Instagram. I'm living for them every time you update.
Thank you so much, Maggie. So great talking with you.